Hello everyone, so welcome to this part 3 of our webcast on basics in feline reproduction. So as I said, I'm a veterinarian and my area of specialty is canine and feline repro, and I really enjoy having this opportunity thanks to social medias like Google Plus to give those educational webcasts because I'm receiving lots of questions from feline breeders or feline breeders to be, and this is really a good way to cover the essential things anybody needs to know before going into breeding cats. So we already discussed essential things to focus on in the future breeding individuals. We already focused on the breeding in itself. Now today we're going to focus on the gestation in the pregnant queen and what you guys need to know. So without further ado, let's watch the slides I prepared, because as usual, I prepared some slides for you guys. And here it is, gestation in the queen, what you need to know. I think the first thing and one of the essential thing you need to know is the pregnancy length. How long is it gonna last? When is the queen is supposed to give birth? That's something very important, because when you know when the queen is supposed to give birth, this is a very, very important data to better cope with stress, because each time you deal with parturition, we'll see in the next webcast, but it's a lot of stress for the queen, but for yourself. So, and in the queen, gestation lasts approximately 65 more or less 1 day. So the question I always get is, okay, 65 more or less 1 day, but from what, from when, for which event do we need to take as the origin to determine the pregnancy length? And in fact, it's 65 more or less 1 day from ovulation. So remember what we said in the previous podcast, in the previous webcast, sorry. Ovulation is induced in queens. It is induced by breeding. So when they breed, when the male mates the female, this will induce ovulation, which therefore make the determination of the day of ovulation quite easy for you guys, because typically when you breed a queen, she will be bred during 3 days. So, and if the first breedings occur on day 1, when the male and the female are put together, you know that following the first matings, ovulation will occur 24, 30 hours after these first matings. So typically we take the day of ovulation as the second day of the period of breeding. So if there was, again, 3 days where the male and the female were together, we'll take the second day as the day of ovulation, and you can go from there to determine the day the queen is supposed to give birth. And knowing that, this is an important data, because sometimes, you know, you're waiting and the queen is not giving birth, etc. So we always recommend people to start worrying if 68 days after the last day of the breeding period, the queen still hasn't given birth. It's good to go to see your veterinarian to check if there is anything that is wrong, so that they can help you determine what is the best approach in this case. But it's always better to know the day the queen is supposed to give birth, so that you know when you can start worrying about it. And remember what we just said. You should definitely seek your veterinarian's opinion if the queen still hasn't given birth 68 days after the last breeding. Second thing important for you guys to know is how to feed a pregnant queen. For sure, pregnancy is a period when the queen will need extra amount of nutrients to help build up those kittens to be born. And there are many mistakes that are often done when it comes to feeding a pregnant queen. So here are the essential things you need to know. First, we don't feed a pregnant queen the way we feed a pregnant dog. And that's important, because very often when I speak with people, we have good knowledge on how to feed a pregnant bitch, But we always assume that cats are just smaller versions of dogs. But when it comes to nutrition and pregnancy, nutrition and gestation, it's totally a different story. In dogs, in fact, in small dogs, we know that the puppies will take 70% of their final weight in the last 20 days of gestation. So typically, we know that we will increase the energy density of the diet only during the last 20 days of gestation, because this is when the bitch will need more energy to build up, to help build up those puppies to be. But in the queen, it's a totally different story. If you look at the curve here, you see that queens start to gain weight nearly since the beginning of pregnancy. In fact, in queens, during pregnancy, they will accumulate fat reserves that will help them, in fact, sustain the lactation, because lactation will consume lots of energy. And while dogs are able to rely on nutrition only during lactation to maintain their lactation, queens will not be able to do so, and they will need to rely on the fat reserves they accumulated during gestation to do so. So that's why in queens, we'll start increase the energy density of the diet since the beginning of the season, since the beginning of the gestation, which basically means that you need to focus on energy. In queens, we will increase the energy density of the diet by plus 10% per week, starting from the beginning of gestation. Totally different than in dogs. Something else to focus on is the fat content of the diet. Queens indeed are not able to properly synthesize an fatty acid called arachidonic acid, which is essential in the synthesis of some sex hormones. So that's and there are several publications today that show us that in fact when you have a higher level of fat content in the diet, helps improve the fertility parameters and the reproductive parameters in the pregnant queen. So that's why it's important to have a diet with a high fat content during gestation in the queen. Another nutrient of interest is folic acid. Today, we know that the most common congenital abnormality we will find in kittens is cleft palates. Cleft palates are certainly the most common defect we'll find in those newborn kittens. And one way to prevent them today, and this is well acknowledged in humans and in canines, is to supplement with folic acid during gestation, because the structure that leads to the formation of the palate, the neural tube, in fact, will require extra amount of folic acid. And folic acid supplementation in dogs, for instance, has been shown to decrease the incidence of cleft palate. So today, we recommend to supplement the queen in folic acid during gestation in order to decrease the incidence of cleft palates, which again are the most common defect we will encounter in newborn kittens. Another thing which is of great importance when it comes to pregnancy is obviously how to diagnose pregnancy. I think it's always good to know if a queen is pregnant or not, especially when you deal with queens which had an history of infertility and which were not easy to breed, etc. So today, fortunately, there are many different tools that can be used to diagnose pregnancy. Abdominal palpation is a technique that can be used in cats. It's really easy to perform. People are always afraid, when I discuss with breeders, they are always afraid that when they will palpate the abdomen, they might crush the embryos if they do. But to tell the truth, if you do it gently, there's absolutely no risk. You cannot induce an abortion just by palpating the abdomen. And I know many breeders who are doing so and who are very good at determining if the queen is pregnant or not. You can start doing abdominal palpation typically 3 weeks after breeding the female, and it's when you in queens, it's really easy to find if there are embryos or not in the abdomen. One physical parameter that many breeders use as well is the color of the tits. Typically, we know that the tits will become pinker in pregnant queens. So this is an accurate parameter, an accurate parameter that you can check, and it's even more accurate when you deal with queens that are bred for the first time. You will this change of color will usually be noticed around 25 days of gestation. But keep in mind that in queens that already had several litters, it might not be so easy to evaluate. So in young queens that are bred for the first time, yes, it could be indicative, but in older queens, not always so interesting. In my opinion, the best technique to diagnose pregnancy and the technique that gives you the more information are ultrasounds. When you do an ultrasound, you can detect if the queen is pregnant or not. You can detect if those embryos are alive or not. You can detect if they are presence of what we call embryonic resorptions, embryos that started to develop but suddenly stopped their development. So ultrasound give you information on the pregnancy status, but also on the vitality of those embryos. So very, very interesting tool. And here you see this picture was taken 15 days after breeding a queen. So typically we would recommend to do an ultrasound 3 weeks after breeding. And at 3 weeks after breeding in queens, it's very easy to see the embryos, so it's very hard to miss. So again, a very, very interesting tool to diagnose pregnancy, and certainly the one that gives you more information. Ultrasounds are great to determine if the queen is pregnant or not, or if any of these embryos are alive or not. But one thing to keep in mind, ultrasounds is definitely not the technique that will give you the exact, that will help you determine the exact size of the litter. For that, the best technique is definitely the use of X-rays. X-rays performed after 45 days of gestation, because after this date, this is when the skeletons of the kittens will be mineralized and can be visible under X-ray. After 45 days, if you do an X-ray, you will be able to determine the size of the litter, which is not something you can do so easily with ultrasounds, because ultrasounds just give you, just help you visualize a portion of the abdomen, while X-rays will help you visualize all the abdomen. One thing to keep in mind is that X-rays, I often get the question, oh, we shouldn't do X-rays because in humans we stop doing X-rays because it can have negative effects on the growth of the kittens, etc. We know that today a single X-ray taken during gestation will not affect the kittens. And this is still a recommended technique to estimate the exact number of kittens your queen is expecting. Because again, if you know when the queen is supposed to deliver, and if you know how many kittens she's supposed to deliver, you have all the information required to better manage the parturition. And that's a very, very important data, because you know exactly when all the kittens are out and when you can say, okay, I can relax, everything is it's done, she expels all the kittens. So that was my last slide, so I'll stop sharing my desktop and I'll come back here. I think these are really the key elements you need to know when it comes to gestation in the queen. There are lots of other things we could discuss for sure, but in a short webcast series like this one, that's definitely not the goal. But I encourage you to visit our website, go on my blog, and there are many posts related to feline reproduction, and you will find many interesting information that can help you guys when it comes to breeding cats. So don't hesitate to go there, ask questions, comment, share your experiences. As I always say, it's a very small community. Feline breeders, there are not so many of them around the world. So the more interesting discussion, the more constructive discussions we can have, definitely the better for this small community. So thank you very much. I hope you learned a few things. And I'll see you soon for the next webcast, which this time will focus on parturition. Thank you, and bye-bye.